I was very pleased to be contacted by Vlad about this event, because the philosophy of Cosmism is something I've been intrigued by and passionate about for a while, yet seemed to be a very obscure topic. And it was interesting to see people sort of taking up the banner of Cosmism and organizing conferences and trying to put together a movement and so forth. So I was intrigued enough to get on a plane from Hong Kong and fly back to New York. It's always good to get back here and connect with the old friends, and much of my family still lives on the East Coast. So it's great to see such a turnout even at 9 in the morning also. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about what Cosmism as a philosophy means from my own point of view, which is closely overlapping with the point of view of Vlad and of Giulio Prisco and others who have thought about it and will talk today, but also with some idiosyncrasies. And then I'll talk a bit about some work I've been doing in the fields of AI, robotics, and life extension, which are oriented toward bringing the cosmist ideals further and further into reality in our own lives. So, first of all, what is
got it?
Wait. No, I don't want these slides now. Can we just go back to the beginning? Okay, just leave that up there. That's cosmic looking, right? No, not that. Right, the cosmos are interfering with our presentation. They must have something deep in mind. Yeah, you can go to the next slide. Just leave the cover of the book up there. Why not? So, in 2010, I put together a short book called the Cosmist Manifesto, which it's not really a lengthy, serious academic tone. The objective there was more to summarize in a very simple way certain philosophical thoughts about the mind and then the universe and transhumanism and technology. And that's there's a few copies of that available on the table back there, but the book is also available online for purchase from Amazon, and also as a PDF for free download from the Humanity Plus Press website, humanityplus.org/press. So it's if you're willing to see it in digital form, it's free, but you can also order it in dead tree form if you have some nostalgia for pieces of paper in your hands. So I'm going to start by describing what Cosmism means to me, and the ideas underlying what I think of as Cosmism are really things that I learned when I was a child from reading science fiction. I mean, well before I knew that the Russian cosmists had even existed. I mean, I grew up in the early 1970s, first of all watching the original Star Trek on TV with my dad, which was pretty cool. You had the Spock with the pointy ears and the Captain Kirk all macho beating up the aliens, and then I mean each week you had new strange alien civilizations, or intelligent robots with defective minds, and all these things seemed a lot more interesting than what was going on at school or in my local neighborhood. So that definitely grabbed my mind, and I started grabbing all the science fiction novels I could find. I mean, there, as everyone who's gone through the science fiction of the 40s, 50s, and 60s knows, I mean, you had pretty much every possible futurist idea was already there in some science fiction story, from super intelligent oceans, all sorts of kinds of singularities. I mean, minds and aliens of different sorts all over the galaxy, virtual realities. I mean, it's all there in some science fiction or other. I mean, the plot and the characterization aren't necessarily the best, but sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't, but the ideas are amazing. And I grew up with all that, and I really wanted to see all these amazing super intelligences and alien civilizations and virtual realities, and get to become a robot and fly through stars and talk to super intelligent black holes and go to other universes. And I didn't see how that was going to happen in my lifetime. I mean, living in Eugene, Oregon in the early 70s, it was a cool place. A lot of hippies hanging out in the park, strumming the guitar and like marching to protest the Vietnam War and stuff. But I couldn't see how we were going to get super intelligent robots flying through black holes in my lifetime. So, it seemed like everyone was just hanging out, like smoking weed and enjoying themselves, basically. So, I mean, not that there's anything wrong with it, but I conceived a plan to build a spacecraft that would fly away from Earth at close to the speed of light and then come back to Earth like 1,000,000 years later, when all these amazing things would have finally been achieved, right? And there was some logic to that. I mean, if you could fly away at like 0.9 of C and come back in 1,000,000 years, surely while you were having fun on that spacecraft for a couple of years, many people would have been working for thousands of generations on Earth to create AI and longevity pills and super robots and whatever else you wanted. So seemed like a decent plan, so I figured I would spend my life making a propulsion mechanism that would let me go away from Earth and come back in the future. Now, by the time I got to university in the 1980s, things seemed a bit different. I mean, for one thing, I'd learned to program the computer when I was 13 or 14 years old, which was harder then than now, because I mean, you didn't have computers at school, so you had to go out and the first PCs came out around, what, 1978 to 1980, and my parents didn't want to buy me one because why the hell do you need a computer at home as a kid, right? But I had to like get a job delivering papers, like ride your bike around and throw papers on people's porches as we did back then to get money to buy a computer. But once you have a computer and you can program, then you start to see there's a lot of power there, and you start to think, well, maybe some of these amazing things could be done in your own lifetime, because programming, I mean, you can create whatever world you think of inside that computer. And you know, if you have a computer that's just a bit more powerful, you know, maybe you could create a mind or a universe or a set of artificial organisms, whatever you want, inside that computer. And once I saw the power of programming, I started to think perhaps one could actually do some of these things inside our lifetime. Perhaps you could create a thinking machine just by figuring out the right sequence of commands to type on that little computer there. Perhaps you could say, figure out how to make people not die by simulating the human body inside that computer. Perhaps you could program a virtual reality there and somehow jump into it. I mean, there's a lot of power in being able to type whatever code you like, and it makes you think differently about the universe as well, leading to ideas like maybe this whole universe is just a big computer. Because you see you can program whatever world you want in that computer. Well, you know, that leads immediately to the idea of the Matrix, which was already there in loads of earlier science fiction novels. I mean, maybe this world we're in now is just programmed by some other alien 13-year-old kid in some meta-universe programming a video game, and we're just random non-player characters inside his video game. So my thinking shifted due to the advent of computer technology. I started to think maybe we can do all these things inside our own lifetime. And I mean, I recount this ancient history not just because I'm a nostalgic old man, but because it's indicative of exponential progress, of the whole progress toward the singularity, as Vlad was talking about. I mean, the fact that during my own lifetime, things could go from an attitude of, wow, how would we ever do these things in our lifetime, to all of a sudden, you have computers, you have the internet, you have a supercomputer in your pocket that you hold around. And I mean, where I live in Hong Kong, every person on the street is constantly walking around staring at their pocket supercomputer, not looking at the world around them, right? I mean, the fact that you can see these changes within a single person's lifetime is indicative of the fact that we live in a very unusual time where we're approaching what Ray Kurzweil, Werner Vinge, and others have called the technological singularity. I mean, when you think about it, for most of human history, we didn't have this type of situation, right? I mean, people living in, say, Australian Aboriginal tribes or medieval Europe, most of your life, things are just the same as they were. I mean, you're born, you grow up in a certain kind of situation, live in a certain kind of house, eat a certain kind of food, use a certain kind of technology, study certain information. When you die, the knowledge available is about the same as the knowledge when you were born. The house you live in is about the same. Very, very few changes in innovation. This would have happened during a typical person's lifetime. And you know, the last couple hundred years are quite different. And now it's quite different than when I was a kid. I mean, when I was a kid, the gadgets we had in our house were the same gadgets year on year. I mean, it was 5 years or something before you got some slightly new form of technology. I mean, maybe a TV with a bigger screen or something. I mean, now I can't learn to use all the features of my new phone before the phone becomes obsolete and there's a new one that comes out. And trying to keep up with all the radical innovations in science and technology, actually you'd just be reading the news all day. You can't keep up with it all. This is an unprecedented situation, and it indicates that we are rapidly moving toward what Kurzweil, Vinge, and others have called a singularity, which, I mean, we've seen there's many kinds of singularities. What I'm speaking about here is the technological singularity, which I think of as a point in time in which new scientific and technological innovation are so fast that the human mind cannot keep up with them. I mean, think about what if there's a new Nobel Prize worthy discovery every 5 seconds, and a new technological revolution every hour. I mean, then the human pace of thinking and living becomes so slow relative to the pace of change in knowledge that it might as well be there's some just source of infinite innovation over there, which is in a separate scale, in a separate domain in our minds. And once you get there, where progress is so fast, it's infinite relative to the pace of thinking of the human mind, I mean, then you're in the domain of the technological singularity. And you're in a domain where I.J. Good's statement that the first intelligent machine is the last invention humanity needs to make becomes very relevant, because it's not going to be human beings inventing things at this pace, at least not human beings in the current sense of biological life forms with brains very similar to those that have been evolving for tens and hundreds of thousands of years. So suppose that the prognostications of Kurzweil, Vinge, myself, and many others are correct, and the rate of progress we see in our cell phones and in the science and technology news every day, suppose that this progress is really leading up toward a rate of progress that's infinite from the point of view of human psychology, just so fast we can't understand it. How are we going to make sense of all this? I mean, what does life mean when there's nearly infinite intelligence next door or even inside your brain? When you have the possibility of taking your mind out of your brain and porting it into some different substrate, into a robot, into a video game, into maybe some organization of light and degenerate matter, as the Russian cosmists a long time ago foresaw. I mean, how do you make sense of life in this context? What is the meaning of anything? So this is really what Cosmism as a philosophy tries to address, which is why I found it fascinating. I mean, transhumanism as a philosophy and a way of thinking is very, very broad. I mean, transhumanism says it's important to push and try to go beyond traditional humanity to become something more. post-human, or to become a new form of human, which is as far beyond us as we are beyond cavemen or great apes. But it doesn't try to intrinsically say what we should try to become or why. It's more about transcending, being extropic, going beyond the traditional humanity. Cosmism is actually a richer philosophy and tries to give an integrated point of view on what is the meaning of going beyond humanity, what are we going toward, how does that fit into where we came from. And the term cosmism or cosmist came out of the Russian cosmists, which Vlad has reviewed for you. And I mean, as I've recounted, these ideas are things that I came into contact with from science fiction well before I heard of the Russian cosmists and knew that Fedorov and Tsiolkovsky and all these guys existed. But when I eventually did uncover this old Russian work, I thought it was fascinating that these guys had developed such a forward-thinking philosophy. I mean, well before there were computers and before we'd put people on the moon. I mean, these guys, through the pure power of imagination, they understood that this sort of thing was going to happen, that human beings could become immortal, that we could travel through all the stars, that we could put our minds into some other substrate. I mean, they were thinking of a substrate of light, of some sort of radiant body, rather than a substrate of computers. But then, when you get into photonics and optical computing, I mean, that in itself it is a kind of radiant body that we could put our minds to. Of course, the technological details that these guys foresaw were not what we would now see as realistic, but the conceptual vision was amazingly prescient given the world in which they lived. I mean, when I think even in the early 1970s, how remote things like the internet and superhuman AGI and mind uploading seemed. I mean, how were these things in the 1930s and in the 1800s? I mean, to be able to foresee these things at that point that's remarkable. And then to work out a philosophy of sort of cosmic evolution and growth into which these technologies would fit is even more impressive. And the Cosmism is not such a crisply defined philosophy. I mean, I think that each of the Russian cosmists had their own point of view, and each of us now who identify as cosmist in a broad sense has a slightly different perspective. But there are some core principles that most of us who find the term cosmism appealing hold to. Let's go to the next slide. So Giulio Prisco, who you'll hear this afternoon, he and I worked together on a very brief series of principles, which I wouldn't say is a necessary and sufficient conditions for being a cosmist, but it's more of an evocative set of ideas that seem to be close to the cluster of ideas that characterize cosmism. I mean, we see that humans will merge with our technology, which could take many, many different forms. It could be mind uploading, brain-computer interfacing. It could be just transmitting our ideas and our memeplexes to AGIs. It's going to take many, many different forms. We'll develop sentient AGI and mind uploading. We will roam the universe, which will include the physical universe with stars, galaxies, and so forth, and perhaps other dimensions of the universe that we don't even know about now, but will become available to us once we upgrade our IQs by a factor of 100. I mean, just as now we know dimensions of the universe that 500 years ago we didn't know to exist. I mean, now we know about quarks and partons and electrons and gluons. There's a whole universe down below. People 500 years ago had no idea that aspect of the universe existed. In the same way, as we learn more science and upgrade our intelligence, all new dimensions of reality may become apparent to us, and we will explore them. We'll create rich synthetic realities, virtual realities, way beyond uninventive things like the Matrix that just replicate this world inside a computer. I mean, once you can build any reality you want in a computer, why be restricted to just going to work in a job, wearing a suit and typing into a simulated computer inside that simulation? It makes no sense. I mean, the spectrum of amazing realities you could live inside a simulation would go way, way beyond just simulating this 3D world and going to work and taking elevators up buildings and so forth. And it's going to be incredible, the things that we can experience. But as well as disappearing into various virtual rabbit holes, we should be able to reshape space-time in all sorts of ways, as Vlad was alluding to. And this may give us the ability to do all sorts of things we can barely conceive now. If you look at the equations of general relativity, they suggest if you reshape space-time in the right way, you can travel back in time. Now, will that really work? Who knows? I mean, the laws of physics have been revised quite frequently during the last centuries, but it certainly would be an interesting experiment. What kinds of space-time distortions could we create with the right machinery? What kinds of experiences will that make? And if you look in Scott Aronson's book, Quantum Computing Since Democritus, he gives a whole theory of quantum computation in closed time-like loops. So if you could travel back in time and affect your past and loop around and around and around, like in so many science fiction movies, how much computing could you do that way? And he actually develops a mathematical theory of computing in the presence of backwards time travel, which is quite interesting. I mean, some senator is going to get mad if there was government funding for that research, actually. But I mean, it's a very interesting direction. And once we can reshape space-time as we wish, we can explore all this sort of idea. I mean, religions have been promising things like frolicking in heaven if you do the right thing. But actually, if you look at the brochures that the Jehovah's Witnesses hand out, I mean, what is heaven? It's like they see these grassy fields with a beautiful blonde woman and her kids frolicking with sheep in the grass, right? I mean, that's really very uninventive compared to the possibilities for joy and amazing fulfillment that will be out there in the universe. I mean, it's going to go way beyond that. And this whole routine that we have now of having to work for a living every day, of just going and doing repetitive, boring tasks because we need to get resources, we need to get food, we need to get internet connectivity, air conditioning, we need fuel for our car. I mean, this domain of material scarcity is going to be a thing of the past, and it's going to seem very, very strange 100 years from now when they look back and think people had to spend most of their waking hours just doing boring routine tasks in order to accumulate resources. I mean, this is something science fiction writer Ian Banks emphasized in his culture novels. I mean, from the perspective of future civilizations, I mean, any civilization in which they still have money, in which you still need to struggle for basic informational and material resources, is going to be viewed as a very, very primitive situation. Just as any civilization in which your body gets old and rots and dies instead of just being repaired when it breaks, like any other physical system, it's going to be viewed as a very, very obscure and primitive situation to be living in. So I think, of course, there will always be some limitations, I would imagine, but relative to our needs as human beings, we're going to create a situation of radical abundance. If you have a Drexlerian nanoassembler, or beyond that, some sort of femtoassembler that can build things out of elementary particles, I mean, just like now we take for granted you can call anyone on your phone, you'll take for granted you can just download an app that will create a hamburger or a teleportation portal, or say a new video game console, new pair of shoes, whatever it is you want. Then the nano or femto assembler creates that thing for you, and once you're in a situation where that's as cheap as water from a drinking fountain is now, the idea of struggling for resources all day will come to seem very archaic and ridiculous. And many of the ethics that we have now will become completely irrelevant. We worry a lot about stealing things, but I mean, if you can just make whatever you want, you don't need to worry about stealing things. We worry a lot about stopping people from enjoying themselves in various ways. Like if you synthesize the wrong chemical in your lab and eat it, then you can be locked in jail for 20 years, which is kind of absurd. But when you can plunge into any virtual reality you want and modify your own brain and mind however you want, the idea of locking people in a little box because they ate the wrong chemical is going to seem incredibly absurd. I mean, it already does to many of us. And all this is not just about technology, it's about experience. All sorts of amazing new states of mind are going to arise as we explore these new realities. So this is the philosophy that Julia and I have articulated, which I think is very much in line with the thinking of the Russian cosmists, and certainly it is a species of transhumanism. What I would say as the key difference philosophically between transhumanism and cosmism is that cosmism places this step from humanity to transhumanity in a broader perspective of the evolution of mind and life. I mean, you can look at the universe way back before organic life evolved on the Earth as a process of cosmic growth and evolution. I mean, we start with very simple forms of inorganic matter, and then you have the prebiotic soup, you have organic life emerging, you have multi-celled life forms, you have simpler forms of intelligence, you have human beings with the ability to do complex language and tools and culture. Now beyond us, we're going to have cyborgs, genetically engineered bioorganisms, we're going to have AGIs and all sorts of post-human mind networks. And this is all part of an overall process of cosmic evolution in which matter, energy, and information self-organize to form more and more and more and more complex systems with greater capacity for growth, greater capacity for joy and innovation, and greater freedom for different subsets of this network of energy and information to make choices for themselves and grow in different ways. And of course, from our point of view as humans, this particular human stage in the cosmic evolution seems very important, right? Because this is us. This is who we are from our individual point of view. And I mean, you know, if my kids were somehow reprocessed by some super AI to make extra hard drive space for itself, I would be more than a bit peeved, right? I mean, I try to blow up that AI to save my children. On the other hand, from a cosmic growth point of view, it's all part of the process which has begun with simple inorganic matter and is going through animals, through us, and toward much greater forms of mind and life than we are. And what you see is each of these stages in evolution becomes a broader sort of networking and brings more and more of the universe into a complex, self-organizing dynamic of mind and life. I mean, if you look at, I mean, apes are pretty localized, right? I mean, they're living in their tribe. They have their own intelligence and their own communication, but they're just living in some small part of the forest somewhere, and they're communicating with each other and don't range too far. Now, going from ape to human, I mean, all of a sudden, not only are we more intelligent, we're much more broadly networked. We're in contact with more parts of the universe by far than apes are. We can get messages from the stars and send messages to the stars. We can deal with things at the subatomic level. We can phone people around the Earth without even thinking about it. So we're much more connected with more and more of the intelligence and structure in the cosmos than an ape is. And in the same sense, the next stage in evolution that comes beyond human beings is going to be much more richly networked with the universe than human beings are. You know, different minds will be more connected. We'll be able to telepathically send information from one mind to another simply through plugging chips and such into our brain, and then Wi-Fiing and then Bluetoothing thought from one mind to another, right? Then this era of living as isolated minds, where we can communicate only through the very narrow bandwidth of language, will seem archaic and ridiculous. We'll be able to share thoughts, feelings, and experiences and network ourselves into collective minds as we wish, as well as interfacing with animals, nature, as Vlad was saying, potentially beings on other planets or in other dimensions that we don't yet know. But the cosmist point of view views the advancement of intelligence as not only becoming a smarter and smarter optimizer or problem solver, but is becoming more and more richly networked with the universe around you. And you can think of there as being a sort of universal mind of the universe. I mean, how how seriously you take that, there's many different points of view. I mean, you can take it quite seriously, which becomes more of a spiritual or religious view. You can take it as a sort of metaphor to be explored as we learn more and more about the universe. But the Russian cosmists were quite spiritual about it, and sort of like Teilhard de Chardin with the omega point. They really viewed the advancement of intelligence as bringing us closer and closer to the universal mind and out of the little boxes that we have ourselves in as these individual minds. And I think that's an interesting point of view. I mean, the dimensions of it still need to be explored as we advance, but I think it's an interesting ingredient which gives something that transhumanism in itself doesn't give, which is a perspective that the step from human to transhuman is part of a cosmic evolution process, which is what created humans in the first place, and which is at each step of intelligence evolution bringing us into greater and greater connectedness with the intelligence immanent in the universe as a whole. So that's the cosmic part of my talk, and now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the concrete work that I'm doing with my colleagues aimed at bringing this about, which is mostly in the domain of artificial intelligence, but then AI branches out into pretty much every possible domain of science, engineering, or human life. I mean, just as computer chips now are involved with almost everything, including inside some people's bodies even, AI increasingly is part of everything, because as software and hardware get more and more complicated, you more and more need to regulate it adaptively and in a context-dependent, intelligent way, which is what AI is all about. So my principal goal as a researcher is to create AIs that will be as smart as people and ultimately even smarter than people. But that's not just an abstract goal, to make some AI that sits in a box and solves its own problems in a very intelligent way. I mean, we want to make smart AIs that will grow together with people and help solve human problems. So we're working on making AIs to control robots that can go out in the world and become service robots, elder care robots, and liberate people from having to do boring jobs all day. We're also looking at applying AI to analyze biological data with a view toward understanding what causes disease and what causes aging and finding cures for these things. So there's a research aspect to AI, just how does thinking work? How can you realize thinking in a machine? And then there's a practical aspect to AI. How can you use AI to help people's lives to get better and better? And I think both of these parts are important. I mean, what you see recently, not only is the quest to build thinking machines becoming more and more popular, to where Google, Facebook, IBM, Baidu, all sorts of big companies suddenly are taking the quest to build real thinking machines seriously. But as the quest to build real thinking machines is taken more and more seriously, we also see fear about thinking machines becoming more and more prevalent. I mean, Arnold Schwarzenegger with his Terminator in the movies has become a sort of icon for people's fears about AI, that AI is going to mean terrible robots like marching in an army to enslave us all, or use us for batteries, or make us dig in the computronium mines or something. And you have people like Stephen Hawking, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Nick Bostrom, I mean, very serious thinkers who are not idiotic people by any means, who have done a lot in the world, saying AIs may be dangerous, they may kill us all, they're the worst existential risk in the history of humanity. And you know, what Ray Kurzweil has said is, it's not going to be us versus them. I mean, just as none of us want to do without our phone right now, you know, no one's going to want to do without their AI brain implant that helps them think better and helps them connect to other people better and use the internet with their minds. So to the extent that we are interwoven with the AIs in our everyday lives, it's not going to be killer robots out there marching, right? It's going to be, this is the AI that tutors my kid in school. This is the AI that takes care of grandma. This is the AI that does work, so I don't have to do a boring job all day. And that's a much more intriguing and fascinating an appealing vision to me than the Terminator robots marching down the street. And if we want AI to follow along the beneficent, rosy Kurzweilian vision, instead of the darker vision that Stephen Hawking, Nick Bostrom, and others are spelling out, I mean, that is something we can probably influence now by developing AI systems that do good and interweaving them with people's lives. I mean, there's no guarantee, of course. I mean, you could have a revolt of the elder care robots. I mean, and anything can happen. But at least we can bias the odds in our favor by developing AI in a positive and beneficial way now. And the fact that there's no guarantee shouldn't worry us that much. I mean, there's never been a guarantee. I often envision a bunch of cavemen sitting in their cave at the dawn of the invention of language, and they've just learned to speak in complex sentences with multiple phrases, and they're sitting wondering, like, what will this mean for our future? All this talking and lengthy babbling. Will we have to listen to people just bullshit all day? I mean, and while we can't know what is the best course forward, my intuition, for what it's worth, is if more and more of the planet is engaged in thinking about this stuff and bringing it to bear, the outcome is likely to be more beneficial from a human perspective. So I would rather not see all this stuff developed in a secret basement lab in Washington or inside a mega corporation in Silicon Valley, Beijing, or London. I would rather see it happen as a network effect from a large number of people thinking and contributing in all their different ways, so that all these technologies are as interwoven as possible with all different aspects of human life and human beings. So more and more it's a process of humanity as a whole, the whole global brain of humanity, giving rise to the next phase of evolution. And I mean, it's hard sometimes to connect this cosmic view with the often tedious, boring, and difficult work of making robots to work. Like, you wouldn't imagine the amount of work that went into making the neck of that robot. Like, just to get the head to move properly on top of the body, which were made by different people in different times. I mean, that's like, a couple guys spent a week like 3D printing different necks and connecting the wires there. So I mean, when you're actually doing this stuff, most parts of the work are mind-numbingly boring and tedious, and it takes a long time to get very simple things to function. And I mean, it's that way even for those of us who are pretty good at this, let alone for people getting involved newly who don't know what they're doing. But I mean, it's important to keep in mind the bigger picture. I mean, the nitty-gritty can be a pain and quite difficult and quite complex to learn and to do. But I mean, in the big picture, all of us are contributing to much broader cosmic growth processes, and these Russian cosmists and other earlier visionaries saw this quite clearly, even though the technology of that time was very primitive. It's much easier for us to see now, and you know, I'm really happy to be alive at a time when I may be able to experience, you know, the birth of new super intelligent life forms. I mean, this is a gift for all of us, right? I mean, we, in a sense, you know, we could all have been born 1,000 years ago. Everything is just the same from beginning to end of our lives. So in order to get some hope and novelty and excitement in life, you have to delude yourself there's an afterlife where you'll frolic with the angels, right? I mean, now we're living at a time when transcendence can be engineered within our own lifetimes by our power of thought and the power of our own work and our own networking and working together. It's an amazing time to be alive, and I'm thankful to Vlad for inviting everyone to gather us today to talk about it.
Stephen Wolfram, and these other guys kind of bring up this idea that the universe might be a computation. And there's this digital physics, digital philosophy kind of thing, and you have a causal steps program that's trying to explain causal structure in space-time.
All very interesting.
Structures. we're starting to discover matter, energy, what fundamentally maybe extract this information. So it makes me think and relate this to consciousness as mind, because it is something that we really don't understand very well. And you may know that Giulio Tononi's theory of
integrated information.
Right? And last year I read this paper that asks, is consciousness computable? And so they try to use the concept of Kolmogorov complexity to assume that the integration of information, which is sort of lossless compression, and then using that assumption they conclude that consciousness is not computable. Now, that can't possibly be true according to the stuff like the holographic principle frequency bound.
I mean,
I know you had I think you brought up a paper on this very subject.
A few things. I mean, I think from a larger point of view, we have to see that humanity has changed its theories of physics every few decades, right? So I mean, I don't take too seriously fundamental limitations based on our current theory of physics, which may be overturned. Nor I mean, stuff like Frank Tipler, you know, we can orchestrate the big crunch in a certain way to create infinite algorithmic information. I mean, before the big crunch comes around, we'll probably have gone through 8 million revisions of physics, right? So I mean, I mean, according to our current theories of physics, there's no reason you can't model the universe as a computer, right? I mean, at least quantum Turing machine can simulate any quantum system, and you could probably do something similar for the standard model. And I mean, we don't know how to integrate general relativity with the standard model, so whether you can do that computationally, nobody knows. But I mean, based on my current view of physics, I'm favorable toward causal set theory in that whole direction, although it's just a beginning, right? But it seems like a very interesting way to think about things, although we don't know exactly where it'll lead. Consciousness, that's sort of a whole other kettle of fish, I think. I mean, Tononi's integrated information is obviously much too simple. So you've probably seen Tegmark's paper, Consciousness as a State of Matter, where I don't agree with everything there, but I mean, I agree with looking at integrated information as one among many different characteristics of consciousness. I mean, it's clearly not like a consciousnessometer where you can measure the integrated information and say, just based on that, this thing is consciousness to a certain degree. So clearly information integration is a key aspect of consciousness. Clearly it's not all of it, and I would say the same about Kolmogorov complexity algorithmic information, which of course has some well-known mathematical relations to entropy related to mutual information used in integrated information. You know, all these are clearly aspects of consciousness. I don't think they summarize it. So I mean, I suspect consciousness as some aspect that goes beyond current theories of physics. So I'm very interested in what I call second-person science, which we can't do yet. But like, what if I could wire my brain into Randall's brain, which we could already do now for limited purposes if we felt like cutting our heads open and trying it, which I guess we don't just yet. But once we understand the neural code a bit better, if you could connect people's brains in a way that they temporarily became a sort of coupled system, could I feel his consciousness there, sort of in the way that I feel my arm there, right? And then what if he feels pain? Do I sort of feel that pain if it was dimly happening in some other part of my mind? Now, what if he connects his brain to yours? Can I feel him feel you in some way? Like that, this is, in a way, it's a different thing than either our first-person experience or the objective tables of numbers, which are our scientific data. It's a fundamentally second-person way of experiencing things. And I sort of feel like once we can go there, we can measure the brain, we can build the brain, and we can wire our own brain in and subjectively feel that brain. Maybe we will make a different sort of progress on the consciousness problem, which should be very interesting. Yeah.
What are you doing in bioinformatics?
Initially we're applying machine learning to analyze genomics and proteomics data. So for example, you have gene expression and SNP data from supercentenarians, 110 years or older, compare that to comparable data from ordinary people, try to figure out what combinations of genes and gene activity distinguish supercentenarians from ordinary people, and we find some very interesting things, including some telomerase-related stuff. Also, we're feeding a bunch of biology databases, as well as data sets, so genomics and proteomics, into OpenCog's knowledge base, and using probabilistic logic engine to just try to draw inferences, like what patterns of activity imply longevity, by sort of doing backward chaining inserts. Give it the query, like, X implies longevity. You know, just let it try to do reasoning, combining a bunch of data sets and databases to figure out what patterns imply longevity as determined collectively for a bunch of different data sets and databases. So the machine learning crunching of data sets works really well for a long time. Applying this integrated probabilistic logic to longevity, we just got working like last week, so this is brand new.
Fuzzy logic?
What's that?
Fuzzy logic?
Combining probabilistic and fuzzy logic, actually. Yeah.
I was involved in computational, biology, functional genomics, and we simulated movement of proteins in the cell, and then mark thermodynamically how information was passed from the protein to the cell.
Yeah.
And that was about 15 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of interesting stuff there. I mean, I'm talking to some guys recently. They're doing a simulation, basically, of how molecules flow inside the mitochondria.
Mm-hmm.
Understand? I mean, because the mitochondria dysfunction is a major component of aging. So there's many different ways that you can fix energy processing inside old mitochondria. To understand which of those ways will work best, you have to know how the molecules actually will flow inside the mitochondria. So we're looking at AI to automatically tune the parameters of that simulation of flow inside the mitochondria. So there's so many different aspects to the problem. Actually, I mean, as you know, in the last 15 years, biology has become an information science. And most biology data that's gathered and put online is hardly analyzed at all, because biologists just are trained mostly in very simple statistical analysis. So if some billionaire wanted to just fund people to download all available bio data into a huge integrated database and run existing AI algorithms so that you would uncover so many amazing things. I mean, we're doing that in a very small way now because we're not billionaires, but it gets easier and easier to do with less and less money as computers get more powerful and as biologists attach more and more metadata to their data sets.
We use it basically for drug design.
Yeah. No, I mean now there's websites where you can upload your target molecule. You can upload the protein, and then within a couple weeks, some Russians behind the scenes will do stuff, and then you'll get back a bunch of small molecules that you doctor that protein. So it's a web service. It's quite cool. Yeah.
One problem I have with AI as an example with the race to build the cars, the self-driving car. There's a case, for example, of XD Vehicles, which is a company that adopted NASA technology where we bounced on Mars 11, 12 years ago to build a pressure membrane 3 times as strong as Kevlar. They got blocked by the administration. Tesla gave put in a lot of money, donated to the administration. This company kept PR, and they expected to get the funding. And there's a big suit against the DOE. So here, with all the move now, these last few years to build AI and self-driving cars, another approach, combine the two, or a simpler approach, would be to, as a problem with design, where you're doing pressure membrane with super light, super strong, tremendous mileage, it's a whole other paradigm which has major implications for the lawyers and all the other people who, the insurance companies, where you can have a safe, a much safer transportation system. And without the robotics, in a sense, eliminate all this unnecessary work. You know, I can go into a number of other examples that in the big picture, Buck used to pull his vision for the World Game back in 1964, kind of a football field-sized facility.
Well, so what you're saying is there were better ways to make self-driving cars than
Different approach, and using super engineering design, different principles that would, in combination with artificial intelligence, or can become a simpler substitute to solve the problem.
What's amazing to me generally is when you're actually doing research and looking at how society is organized, there are so many impediments to actually making progress, and there are so many brilliant people with great ideas who are working all day in dull jobs to send their kids to college or pay rent, and most of the people I know with amazing, very sensible ideas for what to build or how to do science can't get enough funding to do them, so they're working on other sort of second choice problems they can get money for, and things are built according to suboptimal designs, and people spend so much money just copying what someone else did, hoping to make money from it rather than doing something new. Academics, professors have to spend all their time writing endless research proposals rather than actually doing research. It's insanely efficient and stupid the way we organize things, and society spends most of its money on making chocolatier chocolates and sexier lingerie and Rolex watch stores. Over Hong Kong, there's like hundreds of Rolex watch stores. To buy an analog timepiece, which looks really shiny to impress people, and it keeps time worse than a $2 digital timepiece. Why do we need to spend these fucking analog timepieces instead of doing nanotechnology or solving aging, right? It's ridiculous. But yet, even given all that, look how fast and how amazing progress is, right? So it's true, humanity squelches almost all of its energy and resources on stupid things, and almost all good ideas don't get developed because of social, psychological, and economic factors. But yet, even given all that, the rate of progress is exponential and amazingly fast. So yeah, if human psychology and sociology and economics were not so screwed up, the exponent of the exponential change would be much faster. But my grandfather, who passed away about 10 years ago, he always used to say, well, Ben, consider, given that we were monkeys not that long ago, we're really not doing that badly. So I'll just have to come back to that. Yeah.
It seems that some of the goals for AI, such as creating virtual realities, connecting with existing realities that we're not able to because of interdimensional barriers, are things that arguably we already can do through some spiritual techniques, using psychotechnology to manipulate existing natural systems as artificial or big artificial. So what would be the interface between what you're talking about and the use of what already exists to reach?
That's a big question, but achieving interesting new states of consciousness by meditation and other traditional spiritual practices seems to be hard enough work that most people don't do it, right? So then, you fall back on psychedelic drugs and so forth, which are much easier, but as long as you don't get locked in a little box for 20 years, you get caught by the police. But then, of course, these have a lot of side effects as well, right? So once you can manipulate the brain freely with technology, I would imagine the capability to explore different states of consciousness will become significantly more dramatic than it is now, which can lead to good and bad things, right? There's the wireheading problem, there's much written about, just connect some wires to your pleasure center, but you may never want to unplug, right? And once someone unplugs you, you'll try to kill them until they plug you in again. And I think no more than 98% of humanity will do that. So there will still be some of us left trying to go explore the stars and engineer new things rather than just blissing out all day. Because there's going to be a lot of other interesting states of mind to explore, both individually and in terms of fusing your mind with others. Fusing your mind with AIs of various sorts that we build. huge number of possibilities. I mean, including the possibility of discovering aspects of being that science doesn't know or understand. I mean, this would be a whole other topic that will freak out half the audience. But I mean, I edited a book last year on the evidence for paranormal phenomena, precognition, ESP, and so forth. And in my own view, which is not necessarily shared by most of my OpenCog colleagues, but I mean, in my own view, the scientific evidence for these things is reasonably compelling. So I wonder if, as we advance with AI, nanotech, femtotech, and all these things, are we going to probe into whatever aspects of the universe are being very erratically and confusingly tapped into with these paranormal phenomena? I mean, with the subset of claimed paranormal phenomena that are valid instead of fraudulent or delusory in some way. But I mean, all that is much less clear to me than AI itself, whereas how to build a machine that can learn, reason, and think and perceive and act like people. But by this time, that seems fairly clear to me, and it's just a lot of work. I mean, just as, building Microsoft Word, there's more than 100 engineers working on that for many years. It's just a word processor. So I mean, building a thinking machine, even if you understand to do it, it's a large-scale project. It's still going to take a number of years, but that part is clear to me. But once you do that, yeah, that may open up all sorts of other interesting horizons. Yeah.
So I'm interested in this, in your line about the new ethics that's based on, and as you said, joy, growth, and freedom.
Yeah.
You talk about AI and mind uploading, building machines that operate like human mind, but no, it's based on the way the brain works, which is a lot of cause and effect, a lot of action and reaction. What do you mean by freedom?
Well, yeah, that's I remember a story by Franz Kafka, which described a monkey that was kept. I think it was in a train in a little jail. But anyway, the monkey's in a little prison cell, and people come by and tease it and give it food. But the monkey really wanted out of that cage. So he studied people and thought and learned more and more until eventually he learned enough human language to trick people by speaking and letting it out of the cage. And there was a line in that story which said the monkey was never after freedom. Freedom is just a complicated abstraction. What the monkey was looking for was a way out. But that was some good sort of European existentialist humor. But I mean, freedom. I mean,
Is that what you meant by freedom?
kind of. I mean, freedom is there's always many ways out of your current state. And, I mean, there's a book by Henrik Walter, a German philosopher, the neurophilosophy of free will, and he goes through and he first of all analyzes how the classical concept of free will is incoherent. And I mean, there's not even really a clear logical formulation that corresponds with the classical notion that we have free will. I mean, people say quantum mechanics allows it, but it doesn't. There's some sort of randomness there, but the ability to have a random choice made isn't really free will any more than the ability to have a deterministic choice made. So, but as Walter analyzes free will, I mean, it largely comes down to chaotic dynamics. If you have a complex self-organizing system such that a coarse-grained view of the state space of that system won't let you predict what it does in a given situation. I mean, then from an external observer's point of view, that system is acting like it has free will because you're looking at it, and if you look at it in coarse-grained state space, you can't tell which choice it's going to make, or which way out it's going to take from its current situation. On the other hand, there's the subjective feeling of free will also, which many of us have, for whatever that's worth. I mean, I enjoy that feeling. So I guess what Walter concludes is, if you have this subjective sense of free will, which requires a whole bunch of apparatus, right? And that requires self-modeling. It requires some reflection, some complex cognitive structure just to have a sense of free will. Once you have that sense of being a self with free will, and you have a complex enough chaotic dynamics that others cannot realistically predict which choice you're going to make, what he says is, hey, that better be good enough, because that's all you're going to get, right? So, provisionally, that would be what I'd say about free will. From the outsider's point of view, you can't predict it. And from the insider's point of view, you feel like it's free will. I mean, that's what we can have according to science as we know it today. Now, as science advances, as we understand what underlies paranormal phenomena, as we understand more and more about the universe, maybe there's going to be some other understanding of free will that we don't have now. I'm not sure. But what underlay me using growth, choice, and joy, what underlay me choosing those three as key ethical principles was a sort of sequential process. I mean, first of all, joy is good. I mean, I'd rather be happy than sad, right? I mean, we can't argue with that. But then, if you just think, do we want a pure universal orgasm of the universe, where the universe is just one big moment of joy? I mean, of course, once you're in there, you're never going to regret it and want to turn it off. But somehow, I like the idea of new patterns forming and new things growing and appearing. I would have to be human to like that idea of novelty and growth happening. So then you've got joy and growth. But then, if you just have one undifferentiated field of patterns emerging out of patterns out of patterns, I mean, maybe that's really what it is in the universe from a deeper point of view. Again, as a human, I'm sort of attached to somehow being an individual charting my way through this field of patterns unfolding from patterns. So then, what choice implies you have some individuated entity that has certain possible pathways and is selecting among them according to a certain dynamic. So it really brings you individuation. So what you have then is you have joy, you have growth and ramification of new forms, and you have individual entities navigating ways through this joyful, growing universe. So that's very, very abstract as a goal system. And as Eliezer Yudkowsky would point out, what all these words mean to us is very complex and hard to pin down mathematically. So, I mean, each of these words is a token for a whole bunch of complexity of human culture and understanding. So, I mean, I don't attach too much meaning to any list of ethical principles, but at least they're interesting as something to direct your thought in one direction rather than another one. I mean, talking about joy, growth, and choice, that's a little different than talking about, like, don't covet your neighbor's wife and the Ten Commandments, right? I mean, even if it's not precisely defined, it can never be more than a way of intuitively directing your thought. I guess we're running out of time. Well, time is an illusion anyway.